Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about 7 must-draft sleepers for our upcoming 2024 fantasy football draft. All players who currently, based on their average draft position, are steals going into our upcoming leagues, regardless of what platform you draft on, whether it be ESPN, Yahoo, Sleeper, or Underdog Fantasy. All of these players are steals and could very easily lead you to capturing a 2024 fantasy football championship. So over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be introducing these players at a variety of different positions, talking about them, giving you guys my thought process and opinions, and of course, presenting a lot of statistics in order to justify the reasons we are targeting these players. Again, they are going to be late round investments. They're not going to break the bank in terms of the overall investment, but what they're going to give you in return is going to be significantly more, and of course, help you succeed in 2024. Before we get into today's content, a couple reminders. If you haven't yet already, of course, subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2024 season and on our way to 100,000 subscribers. Cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Additionally, if you guys want more content besides the videos and live streams I produce on the channel, you can go ahead and capture my 2024 fantasy football draft guide by traveling down to the description and heading on over to Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you use code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, you'll get my 2024 fantasy football draft guide, the associated rankings with that draft guide by position, by tier, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, flex, super flex, half PPR, full PPR. You'll get all those rankings up to date, so regardless of when you're drafting this month, you'll be prepared. Additionally, the advantage doesn't stop there. I'll send you guys Sunday morning rankings with all of those rankings every week from weeks 1 through 18 for the rest of the season. So for those of you interested in, of course, helping yourself capture a 2024 fantasy football championship, check that out today. Make sure you're eligible based on your current location, based on the right side of the screen, of course, as you can check that out. If you are not eligible or you've used a code in the past, you can always go to Patreon. We have all this content and much more available there. Thank you very much for the support. So what I wanted to go ahead and do is primarily talk about the results of 2023's list in terms of must-draft sleepers. And this is just the exact graphic that we used last time. And obviously, many of you remember this who were around the channel this time last year. We talked about players like Nico Collins, Devon Achane. Before even Achane hopped on screen, we had Raheem Mostert, Jordan Addison, Sam Laporta, Zay Flowers, Antonio Gibson, and Adam Thielen. All suggestions I made in terms of must-draft sleepers this time last year. And the fantasy gods shined upon me. It was an incredible turnout in terms of the success based on my suggestions in this overall category. So hopefully, with all the methodology that I utilized last time in this overall category, going into 2024, hopefully we can have just as high of a hit rate. Now, even though I wasn't able to predict players of the caliber of Puka Nacua or Kyren Williams, I certainly was able to predict Nico Collins and his potential for success in 2023. So going into this upcoming year, the Nico Collins in my mind of 2024 is Joshua Palmer of the Los Angeles Chargers. I understand that there's a lot of speculation as to whether or not Joshua Palmer is going to be the number one in many of our eyes. Again, Ladd McConkey was drafted, of course, this offseason in the second round. Many of us thinking that he may end up being the number one. But based on everything that revolves around Joshua Palmer, what he's demonstrated as of late in his current ADP, he is certainly going to be a wide receiver that I want to have on roster going into 2024 because he absolutely has an opportunity of being this year's Nico Collins. Now, Nico Collins, prior to his breakout, was wide receiver 87 and 78 in his first 2 seasons in the NFL. In the last 3 years, Joshua Palmer has ranked as wide receiver 75, 40, and 64, primarily because he has played behind the likes of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. But now he has an opportunity going into 2024. With no more Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, and Gerald Everett within this lineup, the entire offense in terms of receiving threats has been gutted. And the most stable relationship within this offense with Justin Herbert is going to be the experience that Joshua Palmer has had over the course of the last couple years with Herbert. So going forward, the expectation is that, of course, he should end up seamlessly being the number one receiver to begin the season and hopefully retain that for the entirety of the 2024 year. Primarily because from what we have witnessed over the course of the last 2 seasons, in games in which we have seen either Mike Williams or Keenan Allen missing time, Joshua Palmer has been incredible for fantasy purposes. We go back to 2022. From weeks 2 through 13, in games in which either Keenan Allen or Mike Williams were injured, Joshua Palmer was averaging 8.2 targets per game, 10.75 fantasy points per game, and a half PPR scoring format. He was on pace in a 17-game season for 139 targets, 92 receptions, 1,032 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns, and 180 fantasy points. If you go ahead and fast forward to 2023 last year, from weeks 3 through 18, in the absence of Mike Williams, we saw him averaging 6.9 targets per game and 10.5 fantasy points per game throughout those 8 games. He was on pace for 117 targets, 72 receptions, 1,199 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns, and 178.5 fantasy points. Again, 178 to 180 was his pace over the course of the last 2 seasons. All you had to have is either Keenan Allen or Mike Williams off the field. In 3 of the 8 games that he played in 2023 that I've calculated, wasn't even with Justin Herbert in the lineup. It had Easton Stick as their starting quarterback. And even with that all taken into account, last season, amongst all wide receivers with a minimum of 50 targets, he was number 36 in terms of yards per route run, 1.71 average. And he was number 15 amongst all wide receivers in terms of yards per reception, 15.4, which of course was a career high for Joshua Palmer, making his case for being a threat down the field on a consistent basis. Now going into 2024, of course, we know that there's a new regime. There is a new look to the Los Angeles Chargers offense. Of course, you bring in Harbaugh, you bring in Greg Roman, a former offensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens from 2018 to 2022. Throughout that span of time, the Baltimore Ravens were a run-first attack. Of course, especially when you have Lamar Jackson, a quarterback, you're going to run the ball. But the last season he was with the Baltimore Ravens in 2022, the Baltimore Ravens utilized 22, 12, 13, 0-2, and 21 personnel on 83.6% of the snaps. So you may be wondering, Andrew, why does that matter? Well, with the usage of any combination of 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends, potentially even 2 backs, one of them being a fullback, on 84% of their snaps in 2022, it gives us a pretty clear indication that going into this upcoming season, we are going to see a lot of 12 personnel sets, 2 tight end sets, especially considering this team signed Hayden Hurst and Will Dissly, both great run blocking tight ends, to come in so that they can establish the run. So the potential of Ladd McConkey, who is a primary slot receiving option for this offense, being in on 12 personnel sets is going to be difficult, especially considering, of course, he's going to have to, overtake guys like DJ Chark, Quentin Johnston in order to get within that role. But no matter what, Joshua Palmer is going to be on the field no matter what the overall formation is. Now, when we went ahead and looked back at the Baltimore Ravens from 2021 to 2022, even though it was a quote-unquote run-first offense, they were still throwing the ball with Lamar Jackson as a starting quarterback 31.81 times per game. Just to put that into perspective, over a 17-game season, that's 541 passing attempts and ranked 25th amongst all teams if you were to stack it up against 2023's overall total passing attempts amongst all teams. So even though this team is going to be at the bottom end of the conversation in terms of total passing attempts, it's not like they're going to only throw the ball 350 times. There are going to be enough passing attempts so where if in fact Joshua Palmer is able to garner a 25% target share, he is in line for 135 total targets. And with the skill that Justin Herbert has already gone ahead and presented within the first couple seasons of his career, 135 targets to Joshua Palmer is extremely valuable going into this upcoming year. A wide receiver who's only 24 years old and has only been surrounded by great talent at the wide receiver position where he has learned. I mean, again, playing with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams over the course of the last couple of years, veteran wide receivers. Keenan Allen, again, an unbelievable talent at the wide receiver position and is continuing to ball out at the highest of levels as Joshua Palmer's been able to learn over the last couple of years. He's picking up things from these receivers that he's only now going to continue to utilize within his overall bag. Now, going into this upcoming season, I believe that amongst all the wide receivers of the Los Angeles Chargers, Joshua Palmer has the highest floor of potential. Now, if in fact we end up seeing this offense be far more successful than we anticipate, he very easily could grow to having the highest potential ceiling. Now, of course, a lot of people are going to ask me, Andrew, Ladd McConkey, what do we think about him? I understand that Ladd McConkey is going to get himself utilization. I'm not saying that because Joshua Palmer is my favorite sleeper that you have to ignore someone like Ladd McConkey. Understand that based on Joshua Palmer's current ADP, on ESPN, he's wide receiver 65. On Sleeper, he's wide receiver 51. On Yahoo, he's wide receiver 56. And on Underdog, he's even wide receiver 52. Very similar numbers to what we saw with Nico Collins sitting around last season. A wide receiver who was the de facto number one of his respective offense, yet a lot of people ignored that fact. And going into this year, we're seeing very similar patterns with Josh Palmer. Ladd McConkey could be the Tank Dell of this offense. Just like, what Tank Dell was able to contribute to the Houston Texans when he got going. So again, both these guys can coexist. Both of them can be great. I'm anticipating, of course, a lot of opportunities going in the direction of Joshua Palmer, making him a must-draft sleeper in 2024. Now let's talk about some Cincinnati Bengals, specifically Cincinnati Bengals running backs. Currently, as it stands, Zack Moss is RB 34 on ESPN, 27 on Sleeper, 31 on Yahoo, and 32 on Underdog Fantasy. And he has pretty big shoes to fill. And the reason why he is still within this 30 range is because of the conversation that we're going to have in just a couple moments regarding Chase Brown. But he is in this range as a top 36 running back because The opportunities that Joe Mixon has been given over the course of the last couple years are extremely valuable. And Joe Mixon has been able to finish as the number 3, 12, and 8 overall running back in a half PPR scoring format in these 3 seasons, 2021 to 2023. Last year from weeks 1 through 11 with Joe Burrow in the lineup healthy, well, I guess semi-healthy considering the first couple weeks he was hobbled. Nonetheless, Joe Mixon throughout that span of time was averaging 18.4 touches per game. There is a lot of opportunity to be had. And from what we witnessed last season in 2023 with Zack Moss as a member of the Indianapolis Colts, he really did prove that he could be a 3-down back and a starting back in the National Football League based on his overall production. From weeks 1 through 8 of the 2023 season, averaging 16.74 fantasy points per game. He was the number 4 overall running back throughout that span of time and number 7 overall in terms of fantasy points per game on average in a half PPR. Now, he was able to hold down the fort until, of course, Jonathan Taylor returned and was at a full capacity from weeks 9 and beyond. But nonetheless, when given opportunity, success followed. Last season, in games in which he had 12 or more touches, 14.61 fantasy points per game. In games in which Moss played 50% of the snaps or more, 14.7 fantasy points per game. Now, going into this upcoming season, the starting running back job of this backfield is up for grabs. And even though many do believe Zack Moss has already taken that and he's going to run away with it, there is a possibility where, of course, Chase Brown could come in and steal some opportunities. And considering this backfield amongst all teams in the National Football League were ranked 30th in running back attempts, 23rd in running back targets, and 29th in running back opportunities, there's, again, not that much opportunities to where you can feed 2 monsters and have them coexist. So even though all of those lower numbers in terms of opportunities were able to support the number 8 overall back in Joe Mixon, there is still some inherent risk when investing in this backfield if, in fact, we are not going to find the established back going forward, especially when we take into account that last season, as soon as Joe Burrow went down with the injury, from weeks 13 through 18, Chase Brown finally got himself, some utilization, averaging 8.83 touches per game and 7.28 fantasy points per game. Now, we know that Zack Moss is a capable 3-down back, like I mentioned earlier, throughout his career from 2020 to 2023. 100 targets, 75 receptions, 523 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns. Over the course of his entire career, he has only been given 570 total touches. So in terms of being fresh and in terms of sustainability, potentially getting injured, it is far less likely than other running backs who have over 1,500 potential touches throughout their NFL careers. Now, obviously, in comparison to Chase Brown, he is a fresh running back only in his second year this upcoming season. But the way that I approach Zack Moss in my mind is very reminiscent to what we ended up kind of doing last season, unfortunately. Many of us made the mistake of disregarding running backs based on the fact that they had backfield competition. Kamara, with, of course, the emergence of Jamal Williams. We worried about Pacheco with, of course, McKinnon and CEH last year. We worried about ETN with Tank Bigsby last season. I mean, shoot, we even worried about Raheem Mostert with Achane and Jeff Wilson Jr. Yet, those running backs all delivered. So what if Zack Moss is the guy? What if he's the guy that we need to have on roster? And of course, many of us are ignoring that fact. One of these guys that going into this upcoming season, I'm willing to take a swing on. Now, again, I want to continue to talk about this backfield because if I'm not going to get Zack Moss in my upcoming draft, I might as well get someone like Chase Brown. Currently RB39 on ESPN, RB40 on Sleeper, RB32 on Yahoo, and RB28 on Underdog Fantasy. Now, again, as it currently stands, the expectation is that Zack Moss, brought in with a 2-year contract, is going to be the starting running back. But based on everything we have seen from training camp, all indications point to a split in terms of first team reps and touches. And of course, the potential of Chase Brown slowly but surely taking the job from him as we progress. Now, from what we witnessed last season from Chase Brown, from weeks 13 through 18, like I mentioned earlier, 8.83 touches per game, 7.28 fantasy points per game throughout those 6 games at the back end of the year, 4.12 yards per carry, 3.36 yards after contact per attempt. I mean, he logged the second fastest time amongst all players in the National Football League on a singular play. He ran 22.05 miles per hour, only second to DK Metcalf, and ahead of guys like Tyreek Hill, Raheem Mostert, Achane, who, of course, were at the top 10 of that category on multiple occasions. So, of course, we know that he has the explosive playmaking ability. But is this all enough to take over the job from Zack Moss? I mean, yes, we know that Chase Brown is a more capable, third down back. We know that Moss is a bigger back that is going to obviously run downhill. But if, in fact, Zack Moss is not going to be as efficient, is there a chance that Chase Brown takes over? The way that I see this, Zack Moss, Chase Brown, is the exact same way that I saw Mostert and Achane last year. They could both coexist. They could both find themselves a lot of success, considering they're associated with a good offense. And the coexistence of both of them still being in this backfield could lead to success. But if one of them takes the step further, they could very easily be the Joe Mixon of this offense this year and find themselves a lot of success. The next player I wanted to talk about is Brian Thomas Jr., rookie wide receiver out of Louisiana State University. Someone that is currently via ESPN, wide receiver 49, via Sleeper, wide receiver 46, via Yahoo, wide receiver 40, and via Underdog Fantasy, wide receiver 41. He is a 6'3" wide receiver with 4.33 speed, a 38.5-inch vertical leap. His final season at LSU, 68 receptions, 1,177 yards, and 17 receiving touchdowns. Now, I've talked about this ad nauseum over the course of this offseason, and I'm going to continue to mention it because history suggests that first-round selected wide receivers, and that's exactly what Brian Thomas Jr. is, first-round selected wide receivers going into their rookie year have a lot of potential for success. Since 2019, there have been 24 total rookie wide receivers who ranked amongst the top 36 in a half PPR scoring format of their own individual position. That's 4.8 on average per season since 2019 throughout those 5 seasons. Of those 24 wide receivers, 11 of them were first round selections. So 46% of this group from the first round wide receiver selections. Now, of those 11 wide receivers that were able to accomplish that, there were 23 first round selected wide receivers over the course of the last 5 seasons. So when we calculate the potential success rate of 11 of 23, that's only 48%. Not a great number. But if we exclude injuries from Jamison Williams, Jahan Dotson, Treylon Burks, Kadarius Toney, Rashad Bateman, Jalen Reagor, and N'Keal Harry, all first round selected wide receivers that in their rookie seasons missed a significant amount of time due to injury, it's actually 11 of 16, which is a 69% success rate, nearly 70%. 7 out of every 10. I mean, with 7 potential first-round wide receivers selected this year, there is a chance that 5 of the 7 end up finishing within the top 36 rankings just based on history of the last 5 seasons of fantasy football that have transpired. Now, when we look at first-round wide receivers that played a minimum of 15 games in their rookie season, those wide receivers averaged 114 targets, 72 receptions, 955 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns, and 167.73 fantasy points. And luckily for Brian Thomas Jr., he has no extensive injury history. The only thing that he has is 1 concussion over the course of the last couple seasons. Now, if we focus on the idea of playing 15 games minimum within your rookie year since 2019, there were 13 rookie wide receivers that were selected in the first round who were able to accomplish that. 10 of those 13 found top 36 success within the rookie season, 77% success rate. So all the numbers are positively looking in the direction of someone like Brian Thomas Jr., who is the next Calvin Ridley of this offense. Calvin Ridley last season from weeks 1 through 12 with Christian Kirk in the lineup, averaging 6.91 targets per game, 11.33 fantasy points per game, and was the number 17 overall wide receiver. Now, again, I wanted to present the statistics that he presented with Christian Kirk in the lineup because, again, Christian Kirk missed a lot of time at the back end of the year, and it gave Calvin Ridley more opportunity. But with Calvin Ridley gone, of course, Brian Thomas Jr. filling into his position, and of course the return of Christian Kirk from his injury, I'm just trying to give you an understanding as to what kind of opportunity and potential fantasy production we're going to see from someone like Brian Thomas Jr. this year. Now, even if we look at the 2022 Jacksonville Jaguars, Zay Jones within that offense, weeks 1 through 18, 7.56 targets per game, 9.82 fantasy points per game. In 2022, the Jacksonville Jaguars were able to support the number 11 wide receiver overall, the number 26 wide receiver overall, the number 6 tight end, and the number 17 overall running back. And if in fact we continue with the healthy games that Zay Jones participated in 2023, he was still averaging 7.57 targets per game. A full 17 game pace for that overall share of opportunity is 129 total targets. So as we approach 2024 with no Calvin Ridley and no Zay Jones, there is a potential in which, of course, Brian Thomas Jr. steps up. Now, the primary threat to the potential upside of Brian Thomas is, of course, going to be Gabriel Davis. He was signed to this team this offseason, but honestly, I'm not too afraid of the potential of Gabriel Davis. The way I see it, you wouldn't make a first-round investment in someone like Brian Thomas Jr. unless you knew that he was going to make an immediate impact, considering the window that the Jacksonville Jaguars currently have with Trevor Lawrence. So the way I see it, with this offense being top 10 in terms of total passing attempts in each of the last 2 years under Press Taylor, their offensive coordinator, 620 passing attempts, and in the following year after that, 596. If we were to take 20% of the target share on a 600 passing attempt season, that's 120 potential total targets going in the direction of Brian Thomas Jr. this upcoming season, which again would make him the number 3 receiving option behind Christian Kirk and of course Evan Ingram, but still the number 3, getting himself over 100 potential targets, which again, we have witnessed and seen from guys like Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones within this offense over the last couple years. Now, if in fact you are worried about that potential number, 120 targets, being a little bit too high, I would have to agree with you. I think that it is a little bit overzealous for a rookie wide receiver, but when we look at the history of fantasy football, from 2019 to 2023, there were 11 wide receivers, like I mentioned, that finished within the top 36 rankings within the position their rookie year. All of those wide receivers, except for one, were able to surpass 104 total targets. That one wide receiver that wasn't able to was Brandon Ayuk. He had 96 total targets because he only played 12 healthy games that year. So honestly, the prior statistics could even be a higher potential for success in terms of the rate if in fact Ayuk played a full year, but nonetheless, only 4 of those wide receivers had over 120 total targets, which was Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson. So I don't obviously put Brian Thomas Jr. to the kind of scale of those players. I think Malik Neighbors and of course Marvin Harrison Jr. are within that category and in that conversation. So even if I reduce the potential of his target share to 18% and getting himself 108 total targets this year, he still is going to be the number 3 receiving target of this offense that is throwing the ball a bunch and can find himself even more upside going forward as a first round stud. The next player I wanted to mention is a tight end by the name of Jonnu Smith that is joining a new team, of course, within the Miami Dolphins organization. Last season as a member of the Atlanta Falcons was fantastic. He finished as the number 17 overall tight end in a year in which we didn't anticipate as much production out of him. In games in which he was given 5 or more targets last year, averaging 9.14 fantasy points per game, and he was able to set career highs in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. And he was incredible in doing so. So the question is, why am I suggesting a tight end that is joining a new offense, an offense that, again, doesn't really utilize the tight end position much? Jonnu Smith currently sitting at an ADP of, on ESPN, tight end 45, on Sleeper 27, Yahoo 27, Underdog 24. Why am I suggesting Jonnu Smith? I'd like to answer your question with my own question. What do we know about the Miami Dolphins offense? We know that amongst all teams last season, they ranked last in terms of total tight end targets. Again, 52 total is not great. So why would they sign Jonnu Smith? Why would they bring in someone of his potential caliber and his playmaking ability if it wasn't for the fact that they were going to plan to utilize the tight end position far more in 2024? Now, Mike McDaniel, what do we know about him? He is an innovative play caller. He is an offensive-minded head coach, a former run game coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers, and of course, is from the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. And what he likes to do within his offense is utilize speedsters. We've mentioned it in prior seasons and we'll continue to mention it. The Miami Dolphins offense is a track team. You have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, and now you have one of the fastest tight ends in the National Football League in the form of Jonnu Smith. Last season, Jonnu Smith tracked the 3rd fastest tight end time in terms of total miles per hour amongst all tight ends since 2016, which was the creation of next-gen stats. He ran 21.15 miles per hour in a game in which he had a screen pass that went for 60 yards and a touchdown. He's a former 4.6 40-yard dash speed kind of tight end. He is a playmaker, and last season, like I mentioned, he had a great year, setting a lot of career highs, but he was able to do so because of his efficiency in terms of plays after the catch. And what do we know about Kyle Shanahan offenses, Mike McDaniel offenses? It's all about the yak, yards after catch. 7.3 yak per reception last season. Number 4 amongst all tight ends with a minimum of 30 targets. Number 11 in terms of yards per route run amongst all tight ends. Number 7 in terms of total yak amongst all tight ends. Yet he was number 17 overall. If you give him more opportunity, imagine the potential of success that we're going to find here. And we've, of course, already heard Mike McDaniel talk highly about the potential of using Jonnu Smith this year. He said, and I quote, the following: I think he brings physicality and a guy that really enjoys having the football in his hands and can do some really cool stuff with that. He continued to talk about utilizing Jonnu Smith in different spaces of the field because the defenses that they're going to face are trying to stop Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and this great running game. And if you also now have to worry about the potential of Jonnu Smith, I mean, goodness gracious, they're going to have their hands full. And the way that I see it, even though the Miami Dolphins gave their tight ends the least amount of opportunities last year amongst all teams, what we have seen from Mike McDaniel is an evolution every single year. He has expanded his coaching game as an offensive play caller every season. In 2022, even though he was a run game coordinator, he proved that he knew how to get the wide receiver position open. He maintained that, and in 2023, really started to build upon the running game, which of course led to Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane putting up incredible numbers. And now he's only going to continue with expanding upon the tight end position, something that Kyle Shanahan does every single season with George Kittle, but he's going to do it in the form of Jonnu Smith this year. Their current offensive coordinator, Frank Smith, a former tight ends coach in 2015 to 2017 with the Bears, and in 2018 to 2020 with the Raiders. I'm anticipating a lot of utilization from Jonnu Smith. I mean, the utilization we saw in week 2's overall preseason game against the Washington Commanders with the first team offense was given 2 early targets from Tua Tagovailoa and even had a wide open potential touchdown that Tua threw onto the opposite side of the field to Craycraft, who ended up scoring a touchdown. But otherwise, Jonnu Smith was wide open. Not a single defender within 10 yards of him would have walked into the end zone. Nonetheless, the opportunities are going to be there. I mean, they lined him up in the backfield. They gave him a jet sweep within that overall game, a touch pass forward that was technically a target, but they want to utilize him in multiple ways because he is an athletic receiving threat at the tight end position. And even though he's not the greatest blocker and he's not going to be on the field every single down, last season he wasn't either. He only played 57.65% of the total snaps for Atlanta last season. And from what we have seen from the Miami Dolphins last season, they used at least one tight end on 95% of their total plays, either 11, 21, or 12 personnel sets. So even if Jerome Smith is going to play, there's still going to be a lot of opportunity for Jonnu Smith to get on the field and be the number 3 receiving threat of this offense behind Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. Jonnu Smith could and should be the number 3 receiving threat, a player that honestly you won't have to draft until very late in your upcoming draft. His ADP is ridiculously high. I mean, again, on ESPN 170, on Sleeper 239.3, on Yahoo 125, on Underdog 188.9. It varies, it fluctuates, but nonetheless, Jonnu Smith is a player that, again, I'm willing to hang my hat on as my number 2 tight end going into this year, being an explosive potential play and getting himself into that top 15, hopefully top 12 conversation. Let's move on to the thumbnail of today's episode. It is Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. Now, I haven't talked about Buffalo Bills wide receivers all offseason, primarily because I have been trying to figure out which of the 3 wide receivers, Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, and of course, Curtis Samuel, that I want to back because, again, they're going to be throwing the ball a ton in Buffalo. And it isn't only going to be going in the direction of James Cook and, Dalton Kincaid. There are other offensive weapons that are going to be able to find themselves a lot of opportunity and success. And I've gone ahead and keyed in on someone like Khalil Shakir, who based on ADP is wide receiver 57 on ESPN, 53 on Sleeper, 54 on Yahoo, and 53 on Underdog Fantasy. A wide receiver that last season from weeks 1 through 18 only averaged 2.65 targets per game. Again, not a great number at all. But if you go ahead and break it down throughout different spectrums of time, from weeks 1 through 7 last season, he played less than 40% of the snaps every single game, only played 218 snaps in those first 7 games, and only had 9 targets. But then we got to week 8. And in every single game after that was getting himself a lot more opportunity. In fact, from week 8 through 20, when he played games of 65% of the snaps or more, 10.32 fantasy points per game on average throughout those 9 games. Amongst all wide receivers in the National Football League last season that had themselves a minimum of 30 targets, Khalil Shakir had the number 1 highest catch rate of 86.7%. Additionally, he was number 7 amongst all wide receivers in yards per reception, 15.7. Number 3 amongst all wide receivers in terms of yak per reception, 7.3. Only behind guys like Deebo Samuel and Rashee Rice within that category. So we know the kind of potential talent that Khalil Shakir can continue to develop on going into this upcoming season. Now, again, going into this year, there isn't as much competition for him to get targets. And yes, he did not have very many targets last year, but that's because of Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis. Both of them gone. In fact, when we take into account that Diggs, Davis, Sherfield, and Hardy are all gone, that's a vacancy of 284 total targets. 50% of their offense in terms of targets, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns are gone in the absence of those 4 receivers. So again, like I mentioned before, it's not only going to be Kincaid that is going to get himself a lot of targets. And yes, they did end up drafting Coleman. They didn't end up signing Curtis Samuel. But Curtis Samuel is dealing with a turf toe injury, and Coleman is a rookie. And again, he's a second-round rookie. The potential success rates in those capacities are not as shiny as those of first-round drafted wide receivers of the caliber of Brian Thomas Jr. going into this upcoming season. Now, in order to go from someone that was very rarely utilized in 2023 to someone that could be the number 1 receiving threat or potential target of Josh Allen this upcoming season, you're going to need his trust. And amongst all wide receivers last season, postseason or regular season, with 30 targets minimum, he was number 1 amongst all in terms of passer rating when targeted, 141.5. Khalil Shakir was a dominant force last year. And we have heard Josh Allen speak very highly about him this offseason, specifically said, and I quote, "I'm excited to see him step into a bigger role within this offense. We haven't asked him to do a lot over the last couple years. Obviously, last season in the second half of the year, we incorporated him more into our offense. And you saw what he did. Very excited about his season coming up." There is a rapport already built there. And going into this upcoming season, I think that amongst all of the potential receiving options of wide receivers on the Buffalo Bills, Khalil Shakir has the highest potential to surpass 1,000 receiving yards. And honestly, it's not going to cost much to potentially get the number one wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills based on his current ADP of sitting at wide receiver 53 to 57, regardless of platform. He's someone that I'm definitely going after this upcoming season. The final player I wanted to mention on today's episode is Jerome Ford, starting running back of the Cleveland Browns. That is correct, the starting running back, because Nick Chubb is still recovering from that injury that, of course, tore his ACL, MCL, and meniscus. A brutal injury that, of course, happened early last season in week 2, but still, there is not a lot of information regarding the potential of Nick Chubb returning this year and being healthy. So if he lands on the PUP and he's going to miss somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks, and even once he returns, he's going to be slow from the first 2-3 weeks that they get him incorporated within this offense. Jerome Ford should be the starting running back of this offense and justifies his current ADP sitting at RB 37, 39, 37, 36, regardless of platform, where I have him ranked amongst all running backs, maybe the highest across the entire board in industry. So with so much value to be had in this backfield, I mean, we go back to 2020 to 2023. The last 4 seasons with Kevin Stefanski as the head coach and offensive play caller of this team, the Cleveland Browns have been top 7 every single year in running back opportunities. Opportunities being a combination of rushing attempts and, of course, targets at the running back position. They have totaled 526, 513, 526, and 504 in the last 4 seasons. There's a lot of opportunity on the table, and with opportunity comes success in fantasy football, especially at the running back position. Last year, Jerome Ford, in the absence of Nick Chubb, from weeks 2 through 17, as soon as Nick Chubb went down with an injury, the guy was an unstoppable force. He was the number 13 overall back in terms of total fantasy points and number 20 in terms of fantasy points per game on average. He was averaging 12.23 per game with 15.13 touches per game. And that was all with Kareem Hunt getting himself opportunity, 10.64 per game throughout weeks 3 through 17 and 7.86 fantasy points per game. We know that Ford, going into this upcoming season, regardless of Nick Chubb's presence, is the preferred receiving back, coming off of a season of 60 targets and 41 receptions last season, only going to continue to build upon it. You're going to be potentially able to draft someone like Jerome Ford as an RB 39 within your upcoming draft, who could very easily be a top 24 performer for not only just the first 8 weeks of the season in the absence of someone like Nick Chubb, but potentially even further beyond that. He reminds me of the value that Zack Moss presented to all of us early last season. Someone that we were able to get at the very back end of our drafts in the absence of Jonathan Taylor. And if in fact Jonathan Taylor was going to hold out even further, Zack Moss would have continued to be a stud for fantasy and carry our teams. Considering the fact that the Cleveland Browns have the 3rd easiest strength of schedule amongst all running backs in terms of running back rushing statistics allowed from weeks 1 through 7 of this upcoming season, and the fact that there is still a chance that Nick Chubb may not even play this year. You never know. There's always a possibility of that. For a run-first offense that is going to continue to give their running backs a lot of opportunity, I think where I have him ranked as RB 30 overall is safe. I mean, shoot, Kareem Hunt came off of the couch last year, and from weeks 3 through 17 finishes RB 39 in only 14 games played. Worst case scenario, he lives up to his ADP. Best case scenario, you have the starting running back of the Cleveland Browns for the entirety of the 2024 season, which of course, like I mentioned earlier, is top 20 upside, if not better. All right, that's going to cover my 7 must-draft sleepers going into 2024. I want to thank you all for watching. If you guys enjoyed today's content, click the like button down below. Let me know down in the comment section, what other sleepers are you targeting in your upcoming 2024 fantasy football drafts? I appreciate y'all. I'll be back tomorrow with another video that we produced last season. Once again, we're going to talk about league-winning upside players going into 2024 drafts. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.